giving you full disclosure. This is the Debriefer.
Hello, I'm Donna Ballman. I'm a lawyer here in sunny South Florida and author of The Writer's Guide to the Courtroom and Stand Up for Yourself Without Getting Fired. Here with Peter Cox, London literary agent extraordinaire. We'll be discussing major legal issues and the headlines that impact the writing and publishing business. This week we'll be talking about why the press is not the enemy of the people, whether it's a violation of free speech to cancel a book when the author starts publicly speaking in favor of pedophilia, whether bloggers are protected by anti-slap statutes, and an author who refused to speak at a bookstore she deemed anti-Trump. Welcome to The Debriefer. Peter, it's only the second month of the Trump presidency. Do you think we'll ever get to do a show in the next 4 years that doesn't mention him?
Well, I think, America is obsessed with this, actually. I mean, you've just got, you've got to move on, deal with it. Come on, let's not...
Deal with it. That's what they keep saying. We should just deal with it,
yes, you
right?
should. Yes.
I see, yeah. I'm not sure how we deal with this. I really am not. The Authors Guild has just released a statement denouncing the president's declaration of war on the press, and what they mean by that is he declared them the enemy of the American people. And then on February 24th, he actually prevented reporters from CNN, the New York Times, Politico, the LA Times, and BuzzFeed from attending a press briefing. So the Authors Guild is, needless to say, a little bit upset. And they actually quoted John Kennedy, who was a member of the Authors Guild, because he was a published author before he became president. And he was asked about the press during the midst of the Bay of Pigs fiasco and was asked if he resented the media. And he made a strong speech about how the press was very important even when you don't like what they're saying, and that it's impossible to do the presidency without a strong press.
I don't know. I don't think it is so frightening, to be honest. I don't see SS stormtroopers in the streets. I think that...
Yet?
People say that, but I mean, I'm always... Until now, I've always been a big fan of the Authors Guild. I think they really do fight the author's corner, and they have a lot of common sense. This time, I think it's a culture thing. Let's face it, a lot of people don't like Trump just because he's a vulgarian. He is a vulgar person. I'm sure he doesn't read books. I mean, there are articles out there you can find, New York Times and so on, so that he doesn't read it. He's probably never read a complete book in his whole life. I don't think he values books. He's an intelligent man, clearly, a very intelligent man. I don't think he's an educated man. I don't think he exposes himself to new ideas and all the wonderful things you can get out of books. So when he says something such as he has just said, that the press, journalists are, quote, the enemy of the American people, those people who have read books and are a little more educated than Mr. Trump, it sends shivers down their spine, because I think, I've heard these phrases before, these words before. Where have we heard them from? From Lenin, from Stalin,
Yes.
from Robespierre, from all those dreadful tyrants throughout history who believed that any form of criticism of themselves or the regime is tantamount to being an enemy of the people. They are scary words to use. I don't think Trump for a moment knew there was any historical precedent there. I don't think he used them for any sinister reason at all. And bear in mind, Trump is very much a media creation. I mean, he knows how to manipulate the press. He's not going to turn his back on the media. He plays games to them.
But what about banning mainstream media as fake news? I mean, he's called CNN and New York Times and LA Times fake news. That's
all part of his game.
It's just crazy.
If you read the biography and actually listen to the guy, the ghostwriter of the Art of the Deal, who I think terribly interesting chap, actually. If you want some real insight into Trump's mind, I think he's got it. And of course, he was one of the many people who Trump has threatened to sue for sort of going public and spilling the beans and so on. But I assume, like most things, that storm in a teacup has now passed. I thought he had some very good insights about Trump's psychology. And in some ways, I think what he has said and written has disturbed me more than almost anything else. But, this is a game. It's a cat and mouse game that Trump has always been playing with the media right from the beginning. He's realised the power of the media. He is a creation of the media. There's no way he's going to turn his back permanently on these people. It's a little spat. He wants what he wants from the media. Every president before him has played games and, you're in favour, you're out of favour. It's all part of the cut and thrust of politics. I think it's a storm in a teacup. I think you'll see CNN and all the rest of them back inside the briefing room pretty soon. I think it's more interesting, actually, that he is including, non-traditional media in media briefings. He's including some bloggers.
The real
like
fake news.
Wow. Maybe. I mean, that's
Breitbart. Come on,
concept.
Breitbart is the fake news. It really is. And that moves us actually into our next story. We just did a story about Milo Yiannopoulos and how he got this publishing deal with Simon & Schuster, and how some of their authors were actually saying that we don't want to be associated with you if you're going to publish this guy.
Yeah.
And we talked about it being kind of a free speech issue, and of course they shouldn't censor. But then he was caught speaking in favor of pedophilia. And he didn't say, well, all pedophilia is good. What he said basically was that, well, once somebody's been through puberty, they're not a child anymore, and it's not pedophilia.
It's fair game, right? Okay.
And then somebody said something about the priests, and wasn't he, kind of justifying what priests had done, and he basically indicated that priests had taught him some of his best sex moves or something. I don't know.
Right.
The thing was a little bit crazy. Anyhow, needless to say, conservatives went crazy. He was supposed to be speaking at CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Conference. He was their darling right up until that, and they rescinded their invitation for him to speak. And then Simon & Schuster said they're canceling publication of his book, which is called Dangerous. And the whole thing reminds me of the story of, the fox and the scorpion, and the whole thing, you knew what I was when we started. They knew what he was when they agreed to publish him. Why would they cancel him? He says outrageous things just to get attention.
Of course he does.
That's
he's
his
a narcissist.
Whole MO.
He's another person like Trump. Trump's got a narcissistic personality. Well, I wouldn't say it's a disorder, but it's clear traits of narcissism there. Think about Milo. And I'm kind of surprised, I'm impressed, I suppose, with the way that Milo has played his own personal self-publicity. But, he's a bit of an empty shell, really. There's not much to Milo. I mean, maybe in the States you're a bit sort of overawed by this very, very gay, very flamboyant, very right-wing British person. But you know what? I went to school with kids like Milo, and I didn't like them at school because mostly they were kind of bullies and very much full of themselves. And I don't like them now. He's kind of common as muck over here. There are lots and lots of kids around like Milo. I think he's been very clever. He's been very lucky. But actually, if you look at him, he was on Bill Maher the other day, wasn't he? He doesn't have much to say. Politically, he's not very interesting, not very complex. He can come out with sound bites that reliably and predictably make the liberal media go, oh my God, did he really say that feminism is cancer and stuff like that? But you live by the sword and you die by it, and Milo is dying of self-inflicted wounds.
I understand that, but again, going back to free speech, Simon & Schuster is his publisher. They have a contract. Shouldn't the only question they're asking be, is that he's still going to be able to sell books?
Yeah, it's a commercial decision.
If the answer is yes, then why would they cancel the book? Just because he said something outrageous again. He says outrageous things all the time.
It's a bit more than outrageous, isn't it? I mean, paedophilia is one of the few things left now that really has the capacity to shock people, I think.
I think. But, he's obviously saying it just to get attention. And does it sell books, or does it discourage the sale of books? I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe because it ticked off CPAC, and that was going to be his big audience.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yes, I think it's a clear commercial decision Simon & Schuster have taken, and that's fine. They're entitled to do that. If they were the only publisher in the world, then it would be a free speech issue because he wouldn't be able to get published any other way. He said he's got another publisher. His agent, I'm just reading the New York Times now, says that he's planning...
Fake news.
Yeah, but yes, in the New York Fake Times. His agent lists...
Sad.
Yeah. You're in good form, Donna. It says he's planning to find another publisher, whether he's got one or not. He's also saying some interesting stuff here that actually don't get, sort of reported elsewhere, because I know that Dangerous has been a #1 bestseller, even though it wasn't published yet, on Amazon for some time, because of all the enormous amounts of publicity Milo has been able to get. And remember, he just started life as an ordinary technical journalist, a tech journalist covering tech issues. So he's done ever so well for himself. The advance was $250,000. It sold just under 50,000 copies, according to the agent. I would have thought it would sold more than that. But, 50,000 copies, okay, not too bad on pre-orders. Almost certain what's going to happen is that the advance will be written off. Simon & Schuster I can see no way they can recoup that advance. Only part of it will have been paid. If his agent jumps up and down and creates a fuss, and he's probably got a good lawyer, all of the advance should be paid. Because let's face it, if it's a contract, one side cancels the contract, then they are potentially liable to pay the costs as per normal execution of the contract, which would be $250,000 plus possibly other things too.
But doesn't the contract probably have a clause
yes.
that says that they can cancel it for basically bad behavior that
yes.
affects the ability to sell the book?
Contracts often do. Publishing contracts often do, actually. But, of course, with Milo,
if I were him, I wouldn't sign a contract like that because that's what he does.
If I was Simon & Schuster, I wouldn't sign a contract like that because Milo is, by definition, somebody who behaves badly. That's how he's got his publicity. That's why the book is called Dangerous. So Simon & Schuster, very, sophisticated publishers, they know what they're getting into. It would be terribly hard of them, I think, terribly hard to go to court and argue, well, we're not going to pay the balance of the contract as it's due because Mr. Yiannopoulos misbehaved himself. Because the court's going to turn around and say, well, isn't that what he does for a living?
Isn't that why you signed him? That is why they signed him. So I guess they'd have to prove that somehow that one statement it has somehow so damaged their ability to sell the book. CPAC canceling one event, would they be able to prove that? I don't know. It should be interesting. I suspect it will settle quietly.
I think so.
But if it does turn into a public kerfuffle, we'll certainly report it. We've talked about whether bloggers are journalists before, and I think the resounding answer has been they are. And the latest has come up as to whether Massachusetts anti-SLAPP statute covers blogger journalists. And the issue about SLAPP is that you cannot be sued for engaging in petitioning the government or petitioning relating to a public issue. And the question that came up in a recent case is whether writing an article that was likely to get people involved in the issue and maybe written to persuade on an issue is petitioning under the Massachusetts anti-SLAPP statute. And I think it's a really interesting case because the question of whether bloggers are protected is important. Obviously, these days there are multiple attacks on the media coming and anticipated, and the answer has been so far that the anti-SLAPP statute does cover blogger journalists. So I think that's
very interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. And then the next thing is how do you define a blogger journalist? Of course. This is an issue that I think is going to be faced on a variety of fronts, actually, over the next year or two. Who decides? And in some ways in the UK, I think we've come to the wrong view on that because we are moving towards a register, which fills me with horror. A state-approved register of who is a newspaper and who is not. And there's quite a big issue here. I think we may even be covering it in a future debriefer. Because it raises a lot of uncomfortable issues about the state getting way too close to saying who is allowed to be a journalist, who is allowed to be a blogger. We don't want the state interfering with that, do we? It's all going to end in tears.
Well, and especially with newspapers dying, who else is going to pick up the slack? It's going to be bloggers. So there is nobody else. And remember, when this country started, the media was, one guy sitting in his living room printing up little flyers. I mean, that was the media. So that was the free press. And we're going back to the very small journalists. We don't have, we didn't start with the giant media companies, and we may end up without the giant media companies. And I think we need to be very careful if we say that only giant media companies are protected by free speech. Of course they are not, and of course bloggers should be protected. I have to say that because I'm a blogger, but also because I do believe in free speech. And now we have the other side. Conservatives strike back. An author, and I don't know her, but she's her name is Susan Hill.
Big
and I
author.
guess she's
Big
the author
author,
of The
yeah.
Woman in Black.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she's she has canceled an event at a bookshop, and the bookshop is really upset because they said that they actually spent a lot of money selling tickets and advertising, and they had to refund all those tickets. And the reason she canceled the event is because she said they were declining to stock pro-Trump titles, and they were championing anti-Trump literature, and so she refused to appear. I mean, wow, have we really gotten that crazy? I think we have.
I know. Well, to me, this is just another side of the coin. The Authors Guild is on one side and Susan Hill is on the other side. And guys, we need to talk to each other. We need to engage more. We don't need to flounce out and act like lovies. Who actually cares? Who really cares out there in the big, wide, real world? Who cares if an author flounces out of a book signing? No one cares. It's a silly, meaningless gesture. It's much more useful to engage. It's crap.
Because you
rubbish.
just ticked off a bunch of people who were going to buy your book.
Exactly.
I mean, usually if you go to a signing, it's because you want to buy the book and have the author sign it.
Well, Susan, funnily enough, I know this place because I spent a lot of my life in Norwich, actually, in the town concerned. Pretty strange place. It's strange, but we won't go into that now. But, it's not going to make or break Susan Hill. I mean, her fortune is already made and solid. But I just think it reflects the mood of the times, which is one of intolerance. And surely we need to behave in a civilized way to each other. We don't want to campaign to shut down people we don't agree with. They say something stupid and vile and disgusting and racist or whatever else. Let's engage them. Let's explain why what they're putting forward is stupid and vile and racist and so on. But don't just shut down everyone you don't agree with, because eventually you're going to end up living in a bubble.
I agree. I mean, I have a lot of friends on Facebook that are very right-wing. Sometimes when they get a little over the top, I kind of mute them for a while and then unmute them. But if it's just getting nasty, but I do want to hear what they have to say. And sometimes it makes me feel better that there's somebody out there that I think is a sensible person who doesn't think the world is doomed. So, because if you just start hearing that bubble and, we're all doomed and we're going to be a fascist dictatorship, it's really scary. I hear from people on the other side that say, no, everything's okay. In fact, it's good. It kind of gives me hope a little bit for the world. I think we do have to listen to each other. I'm wondering if the bookstore has some claim against her.
Probably.
I don't know if she probably didn't sign anything to do the event.
So
maybe she did.
We didn't sell 12 copies of your book. Is that kind of stuff. But actually, they sold tickets and they had to give the money back.
And they spent money on advertising.
They got a ton of publicity. They're punching way above. I mean, for heaven's sake, people in the United States have now heard of this tiny little bookshop in a tiny little town that no one else has ever heard of, apart from people who come from Norwich, like me. It's great publicity for them. And, I would think they will more than compensate in the sale of anti-Trump books, apparently, that they've got their whole windows festooned with and anything else. I think it's great publicity for them.
Well, I hope they do well. I'm always rooting for small bookshops because it's a tough time. We cover so many shows or so many lawsuits where people claim that TV shows or movies were ripped off from something else. This one I thought was an interesting one, and I don't know if we've covered it in the past, but this is one that got past a motion to dismiss. NBC has a show called Timeless, which I actually watch, and it's okay. It's not, one of the great sci-fis, but it is a time-traveling show. And there's a lawsuit saying that they ripped off the Spanish series El Ministerio del Tiempo, the Ministry of Time, and the show is about a trio travels through time to try to stop a criminal trying to alter the course of history. And I'm thinking, if that really is the substantial similarity, I've seen probably a dozen shows
I was thinking
like that,
Yes, I know.
in all the years I've been watching TV and movies. So, but they got passed a motion to dismiss, which it doesn't mean really much of anything other than what they put in their complaint was sufficient to state a claim. So whether they can prove it or not, I don't know, but it did meet at least the giggle test on the complaint. So
there's a bit of a
it is going
smoking
to
gun
proceed.
here, because the Spanish company says they began negotiating with Sony on a deal for a US version.
Yes.
And so that's interesting, isn't it? Sony is going to have to demonstrate prior art or the equivalent thereof, I think. Doesn't look too good.
Yeah, it does sound bad, although I guess it's possible that the developers of Timeless were doing it, completely separately. And maybe that's why the deal fell through. Maybe there was another group that was more well-known that was doing it. I mean, the people who are doing it, Eric Kripke and Sean Ryan, are actually pretty well-known. So maybe they were already working on something. I don't know. We'll see. We'll keep you posted. And a lawsuit that's been pending for 4 years has been dropped. Conrad Black has dropped a $3 million defamation lawsuit against a Canadian investigative reporter. And it has been going on, and I'm pretty sure we've covered it. There's so many, they all start to blur in my head. But he was suing his not only fellow journalists, but he also sued his own publisher. And he was objecting to 5 passages in a book. It's called The Thieves of Bay Street, How Banks, Brokerages, and the Wealthy Steal Billions from Canadians. And he was upset about a passage that says, well, Canadian corporate criminals such as Conrad Black can't get more blatant than that, and some other things.
Yes.
Yes. So
but he wasn't convicted in Canada. Let me just say, Conrad Black, in years gone by, enormous name, absolutely massive name, maybe not familiar to everyone, but if I say that he ran and mostly owned the world's 3rd biggest media company, that's the 3rd biggest. We're talking about someone, equal stature really to Rupert Murdoch and stuff like that. This is a big, big guy who fell spectacularly. Like Icarus, way down from the sun. He fell, and he's done time. He has served time. He's been convicted. He's done time. It's the Canadian thing that I think was the issue. But anyway, I mean, he's kind of.
I'm a criminal, but not in Canada.
Well, yes,
damn it.
it appears to be. Very interesting person, though. Very, very interesting.
The statement, and it sounds like it's not just settlement. No money was paid. It just sounds like he dropped it. And here's what he said, that he dropped the suit because, quote, he considered the book too insignificant, unsuccessful, and buried by events to be worth the cost and trouble of pursuing this.
That's probably true, actually. It's probably true. Probably sold a few 10,000 of copies, and that was that.
But, so what are the damages? I guess the issue, and I would always say in a case like this, I mean, the damages in defamation is always the damage to your reputation. Well, how is it damaging your reputation to say you're a criminal when you're a convicted criminal?
Well, the thing is
difficult.
about Conrad Black. I mean, his ego was almost absolutely supersized. I mean, just if you just check a few cuttings out, and you'll see some amazing pictures of parties. And he was a member of the House of Lords here in the UK. He owned a newspaper here, the Telegraph, very, very big bastion of the establishment. And he fell spectacularly. In addition to being an enormous sort of corporate tyrant, really, I suppose, he's also quite a historian, quite a well-educated person. And he's written books of some considerable historical merit. So my thinking is that he's looking for his place in history. And, he probably is taking the view, yes, you have some ups, you have some downs, I was up, I was down, but I don't want to be labelled forever in a book that's going to be out there for the next heaven knows how long, 100 years or so, in all the libraries and universities as a criminal. I suspect It's playing to that weak spot he may have, as a lot of people do have, in particular being a historian, his place in history. I don't think he wants to be labelled as that in a book that's going to be around for decades.
Well, it's interesting, but I do think that if you're suing for defamation, you've got to be very careful, because truth is a defense, and you don't necessarily want somebody out there proving that what they said is true in a very public way. Well, that's all for this edition of The Debriefer. If you have questions about using the law in writing or a story you want us to cover, don't forget to tell me about it by hitting the email button on the Debriefer show page. Join us again in 2 weeks, more or less, for more about writing and the law.